Welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. We're happy to have you back with Michael and myself. This is a follow up episode to one of our prior episodes about the drift, and we wanted to touch a little bit more on this. We don't feel like we covered it fully, especially for our specific industry. So let's talk through mortgage and real estate and what that drift really looks like in that industry, because it seems to be that a lot of our friends, a lot of people we know, do end up at this in periods in their career. So we want to talk about how they might end up there and what that might look like in this industry. So with that, welcome in, Michael.
Yeah, I'm glad that you picked up on that on a previous episode, Catherine, because you were wise to say that we should talk more about this. It's an opportunity because of our experience in the housing industry, because there are a lot of real estate professionals and mortgage professionals that we've met and care about that we might recognize the drift, and maybe you and I have even experienced moments of it ourselves. And I think it's fair to say, let's just call that out. Let's talk about it, and let's see if we can encourage some of our listeners today who might specifically be in that industry. And by the way, if you're not, please don't tune out. I hope you're going to find some application here that applies to you. But we can't help from time to time but to dive into the space that we know so well, because we've seen it firsthand. We've seen the opportunity, and I agree with you. There are plenty of people who have found themselves unintentionally in the drift.
Yeah, so let's talk about specific to our industry. What might the drift look like and how might somebody end up there?
I'll just pick real estate to start with. We got to roll the ball out on the court. Let's pick up a game. Folks that I've met along the way over the last 4 decades that are in the real estate profession will tend to end up in that profession for lots of different reasons. But here are some common ones. They sometimes like the idea of running their own business, but it's not really fully running their own business. So they have a lot of freedoms in this business. They don't tend to have a lot of micromanagement. They can take on the number of clients that they want, but they aren't. There's not a quota to fill. They can go to the office if it is of value to them, but no one's expecting them there at a certain time. They can basically design their day around their own personal lives, and so real estate is attractive to a lot of people because you can make a really good living without, at least historically speaking, without having to overly structure your life to do it. So it attracts that person. But that person in their 20s, when they get started, or maybe in their 30s, is at a very different level of ambition than someone who might be in their 50s or in their 60s. And you start to find out that people that get into this business early on in their lives change over time. And the thing that was, really helpful for them, all this freedom and flexibility, can sometimes turn out to be the opposite of what they need. They find out pretty quickly that I thought I wanted freedom and flexibility, but I can't get my momentum up in this business very quickly unless I put a lot of structure around it. So as they're younger, maybe they're more willing to try things because they've got to do what it takes to get a pipeline going. They've got to do what it takes to get some deals closed, because that's how they get paid. But as they get older, they start to get comfortable. They get comfortable with the idea of, I'm making enough. Why work harder? I know what I need to know. Why take more classes unless it's required? And if I can take that class and do it online where I can just click the mouse every once in a while to keep the program going, I, I don't really need to learn all this. I just need to get the score I need to pass the test. And unintentionally, Catherine, I think the drift becomes present because maybe they just don't know why they're doing this business. They knew why they were when they were young, but they don't remember why, or the reason why changes over time because the market keeps growing and changing and they haven't grown and changed with it. I guess there's lots of reasons that could happen, but I think at the end of the day, the drift becomes something that they wake up and realize of, I don't know if I still love this. And what they might really be finding out is it's not a lack of love for real estate and housing and helping people. It's that they ended up in a version of it that isn't exciting anymore. And when it's not exciting, you're really at a crossroads. You're either going to figure that out or you're going to go adrift. And it does happen to people.
And so, how would you define or how would you explain the difference between burnout and drift?
Oh, wow. Okay. So that's a different Yeah, I can see the similarity to those, but maybe a very different outcome. You know, let's separate them into two easy categories, and then we can break them down. You're typically going to be in a drift in a very passive sense. You're typically going to experience burnout in a very active sense. You know, if you think about the reality of maybe the root of those, they could come from some similar places, but they end up in very different places. You tend to end up in the drift very unintentionally. That's what I mean by passive. You don't realize that you've started quiet quitting on things. You don't realize that you've started pulling away from those growth opportunities until you've gone so far away from them that you no longer recognize where you are. Where when you're in the burnout mode, you're usually, when people like to brag about being, the grind, like well, there's a real downside to the grind. Burnout is I'm working so hard, I'm fighting so hard toward what I want, but I'm not experiencing the results I expect. And my only solution to that problem is, well, then wake up earlier and work harder, and it becomes unsustainable because at some point either your mind or your body or both start to give out on you. So the burnout, I think, is really a very active thing, and I think for most folks the drift is a very passive thing. You don't realize you're in that one until maybe you're in real trouble. Burnout, you already know you're in trouble and you're fighting like hell to get out of it, but what you're doing just isn't working and you start to get exhausted.
Yeah, that makes sense. With the same analogy we used a couple episodes ago when we talked about the drift, I imagine the person just paddling and paddling and paddling and paddling and paddling and paddling, and all of a sudden just being like, oh, I can't paddle anymore. And they're not going to make it.
That's a really good reminder because if you think about that analogy we described and that paddling person, if you're caught in a tide, a rip current, any kind of a current that's taking you away from where you want to go, and your only solution is to paddle harder, but you're not studying the flow of the water and paying attention to the fact that you're really paddling upstream, you're really paddling into the current, then you're taking whatever limited resource you have of fuel, and in business that could be time, that could be energy, that could be money, and you're burning it at a disproportionately quicker rate because you don't recognize the current properly. Where, as we described in that analogy on a previous episode, the best way to get out of a riptide, if you're in any kind of a situation like that, is not to swim against it, but to get parallel to the shore so you can swim out of that riptide and then safely back in. And I think that's what folks that experience burnout don't recognize is it's not that they're not working super hard. They're just not recognizing that the strategy isn't working. They don't see that the work they are doing isn't really effective, isn't really leading toward results, and they're not agile enough because either I don't know, their ego tells them don't quit, or their investment in whatever, marketing plan they came up with, I've got to get my money out of this. So they double down. They're a little bit like that, gambler who's been at the table too long and they just need to go home. And they burn out because they're working hard, but they're working hard at a strategy that needs to be reevaluated. And so you're remembering that analogy correctly, because in the very real example we gave of a drift in a rip current, you've got to get out of that current. You're not going to win the battle against nature. So change the path. And that would be my advice for someone experiencing burnout is don't work harder, change your strategy first. Then that hard work will have a chance of paying off.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's continue to talk about the drift in now let's maybe move to mortgage.
Yeah, sure.
So we talked a little bit before the episode what happens to people in our industry and how they move within the industry as they get older and have more experience, and they might move into a managerial position, move into a regional position, things like that. And then all of a sudden they might be like, wait a minute. So let's talk through that a little bit and maybe how people can recognize those things in themselves.
Yeah, it's a very timely topic, because I think we live in a world here in 2026 where most folks that are still active in the housing industry, specifically mortgage lending, recognize that the strategy of that game is shifting pretty quickly. And so some of those folks out there, like me with a little bit of gray hair, have to say, do I really have what it takes to reinvent the way I do things to achieve? And so the lure of being asked, like, hey, maybe we could move you up into a management role where you don't have to slug out on the streets like you used to find the business. You could help a lot of other people do this. It could be very appealing to someone, and I understand it. And by the way, this is not a message for someone who maybe as a young person really had a clear vision and an ambition of being a leader. Because I do meet those folks from time to time. Like, hey, I really want to do great at this origination job so that I have some credibility, so that as I move up into this, sales leadership job, or in the future into some sort of organizational leadership role, that I have some credibility. I think of a person like the guy you report up to. I mean, he really was great at each step in his journey. So his credibility was really strong, but I think he always had an eye for leadership. I think that was something that was just in him. So I'm not speaking to that audience as much as the audience of folks who are more likely to be in the scenario you were describing of, they just somehow, some way, aren't keeping up with the pace of change, and they're finding themselves a little bit disillusioned. And they'll say things like, I don't know if I like mortgage lending as much as I used to. I don't know if I love this business like I used to. And my question would be, is it that you don't love the business, or you just haven't grown at a pace that allows you to continue to succeed like you used to? Because what got you here may not get you there. And if you're not willing to keep growing, to keep going, the allure of being recruited or even promoted into a management job might really sound satisfying in the short term. But Kathryn, did you ever recognize that some of the folks in mortgage lending who are really great at originating turn out to not be as great in a management role? Why do you think that is?
Oh gosh, absolutely. And they're different. First, they're different skills. So I it's really the same thing as, let's say, a processor who's doing really well at processing and gets moved into the LO role. Well, that's going to be a total transition in their role. I know that I was a terrible processor. I'm surprised I didn't get fired, let's just say. And obviously, things were a little different back then. We had a credit machine, just to tell you how long ago that was. But I was a terrible processor, but I'm a pretty darn good LO. And so I think it doesn't always mean the next step is the right step. And people in the industry would go, oh, yeah, of course, that makes sense that someone who was great at processing may not be great as an LO. They're different skills. I think that's the same when you move from LO to a manager. Managing people is very different. Being a regional is very different than being on the street. And I've also seen some regionals pop down into, hey, I just want to chill out. I'm going to be an LO, and that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to have no, regional role, and that's also can be a little tough. So I think it's just different skill sets that you have to look at yourself and say, hey, yes, there's that allure, but do I actually want that piece? And there was a point in my career when I started talking about management, and I kind of had to think about it and say, huh, do I want this because my ego wants this, or do I want this because it's right for my business and my family? And kind of said, you know what? I don't know if that's really what I want, because I'm not ready to be away from my girls, and I'm not ready to, I love to meet with clients, and I'm not ready to give that up. So I think it's a good question to ask yourself without the ego. And I think sometimes that's where people can end up in something that they just thought was the next step, but that may not be their next step.
Yeah, the question that comes to my mind, even as you were giving a couple of examples there, or even reflecting on your own personal purview of this, is you've got to be clear on the why. Why would you be interested in that? And if it's just things like stability of income, or I'm bored and I want to try something new. Look, those are understandable. So if you're out there listening and thinking, yeah, that's actually the thought I've had, is I'm bored, or I just would like a stable income, understandable. But I hope you heard Kathryn loud and clear. Don't assume that the skill set you had in one area that was really a great skill set automatically just translates to success in a totally different role. Uh, Occasionally it does. Occasionally you meet someone who's got that transferability, and if that's you, wonderful. But if it's not, be really clear on the why, because if you're not clear on the why behind it, you might just take the bait and give this a try and find yourself adrift. You find yourself suddenly far away from where you started. And when you found out that that change didn't produce the satisfaction you thought you were seeking, now your confidence takes a hit. Now you start having darker problems. They're not now just I'm bored. It's, am I even any good at this anymore? Is this even for me anymore? And then it gets really dark if you start thinking, well, but I'm too old to do anything else. Who else is going to, like, no one's going to train me up to do something new. And this is a really difficult thought process for people and very real. So I hope our audience that's listening today is tuning in to say, wow, if those are some of my thoughts, A, they're understandable. B, they need to be challenged through the simple thoughts of those vision questions. And then C, if you do still decide to go take a shot at these things, my first comment would be, do them carefully. Don't burn any bridges. Don't claim, well, I'll never do that again, or, make some big announcement that says, burn the ships and all these things that sound exciting in the moment. Because my rule is don't burn a bridge in your career unless you have to do it to keep a crazy person from following you. Otherwise, you might need to walk back across that bridge someday, and you want to make sure you weren't the person who burned it down. So, yeah, these are really great examples. I probably told you about this story that is my story in this as well, but perhaps our audience hasn't heard it, Kathryn. But as you've been to the branch in which I was originating most recently. You've met some of my old teammates. You know who some of them are, and I think they would be the first to tell you, even if we went back today to interview them, that something switched for me during that 2007 crash that happened in 2008, where suddenly I went from not knowing what an FHA loan was in 2007 to having to originate with my team like over 100 of them in 2009 because crazy us, we wanted to pay our own mortgages and feed our own families. So you had to skate to where the puck was going. Thank you, Frank Blakely. And so as I learned about FHA loans, you know who my audience became. It became a lot of first-time home buyers. And suddenly what awakened in me was this opportunity to coach them. I hadn't really thought of myself in that role up till that moment. I had thought of myself as more of a mortgage advisor. I mean, like I was the originator who would really sit down with folks and help them design a plan. And with due credit to our friend Dave Savage, I was going to use a mortgage coach tool to show them a total cost analysis. That's how I approached my business up until that point. But once I started putting on first-time home buyer classes and meeting with first-time home buyers and meeting with their parents who wanted to sit down with the kids and me to make sure that they knew what they were doing and I was a trustworthy person, I started discovering that I loved coaching. It became a change of perspective. And by, I don't know, 2 or 3 years later, 2010, 11, my team was probably telling me with some degree of grace, but direction was, this is the real you. This is what you need to be pursuing. Like, no offense to a 1003, but that's that you're not nearly as passionate about originating loans as you are helping people, and you've unlocked your real path. Go pursue it. And they really encouraged me to develop that skill. So I like to tell people today, I've never left mortgage lending. I just found a way in which I could expand and grow in that direction because I'm passionate about it. So why do I tell this story? I was clear on my why. I had other people affirming it. In fact, I needed people affirming it because during most of the decade that I began coaching were some of the highest income earning years any of my peers ever experienced. And here I was coaching. So you better believe, like they have to test that in your brain. Like, was it about the money? Was it about the ego? No, it was about the passion to coach people. And I was willing to make less money because I knew I was doing what I loved. And that's why I share that story, Kathryn. I hope people realize that if they don't have a clear story of why they're doing this, be careful, because once you make a change towards something that seems like a safer play or a better bet and it doesn't go well, boy, once your confidence starts eroding, that's a that snowballs on you and that gets tough. And I don't want anybody to go down that road. I want people to get passionate about their why. Maybe all you really need to do is focus on how to get better in the career that you're already really good in. And once you get better, maybe you'll start to love it again.
And there's some other things I think people can do as well. Like we talked about last time, who you're surrounding yourself with. Can you maybe take a little bit of a turn where you say, you know what? Reverse mortgages are really interesting to me. I'm going to learn everything I can about them because I can see where this is going. Or maybe AI floats your boat and you're like, you know what? I'm going to figure out, 10 different ways to use AI in my business just so I can learn it. Like that's the great thing about our industry is you can really specialize, you can pivot. We're not only originators or real estate agents, we're marketing experts and we're, organizational masters and we're managers and we do all these different parts and it's okay to kind of dive into one and reignite your curiosity and your business.
I think you are a really great example of this. And so if you don't, I know you'll never break your arm patting yourself on the back, but why don't you let your old coach brag on you for a minute? You're already a top producer in the world in which we operate, and you already have figured out how to build a brand to where you have real market share in your market. You have real success. You win awards. You get recognized by the Scotsman's Guide and the national publications. But you had an interest in learning some new things. And one of the things that you wanted to learn ended up becoming this podcast.
Hmm.
And never did you allow that to distract you from thinking, oh, I've suddenly become a full-time podcaster and I'm suddenly a marketing genius. It was a creative outlet for you. And you've really embraced it in such a positive light that not only do you and I get to have fun doing it, but last I checked, you just logged one of the best Januaries and that your production team has ever logged, which means you're still clear on who you are. You're still clear on what you want, but you're finding these creative outlets just like you did a few years earlier than that when we were on the Clubhouse platform. These are things that you did just like you're encouraging people to do. Go learn a new thing. Go find some new people to hang out with. Go try something, but don't burn the bridges and torpedo your own platform that you've worked so hard to build. You've figured out a really nice way to be able to take the margin of the time you've created and exercise those things that keep the sword sharp. You just keep learning new things. And I just want to compliment you on that because I think that serves as a great example for our audience.
Thank you. I think as I get older, I realize, hey, I have a creativity little piece of me that I have to feed that. And if I do, it gives me more energy and other things. So I think thanks for participating in my creativity project here over the last few years to keep
Well,
me from drifting.
slight bit of selfishness in there too. I love doing it too, but yes, it is great to see you getting to exercise it. Well, Kathryn, I hope whether our friends in the housing industry end up on the real estate side of the fence or the mortgage lending side of the fence, can we just agree that the drift is a very real thing, especially as we get older in our careers? Many of us don't know how to end our careers. That's another topic that I think we can explore at some point because we don't have the classic book of business with residuals that get paid. We have a past client list that have been faithful to us, but what happens when we're not there to originate that business anymore? I think these are other reasons that the drift starts to become present. So I think this you're right. This could become a little bit of a series. We could pick up on that topic on a future episode of, okay, you're helping me fight the drift while I'm still here, but how do I get off this crazy train someday? What would that look like? Can we come back to that topic? I'd love to talk more about that.
Adding it to the list now.
All right. Thank you. Well, then listen, let's bring this one into a close. If you or someone you love has been listening to this podcast and you're in the housing industry and you think, that's me, or that's someone I know and I care about, they've found themselves in a drift. They've maybe started pursuing different paths in this career that they thought were going to satisfy them, but they didn't realize where their first love was. And now they're confused, frustrated, and maybe even ready to give up. If you care about those folks, one thing I hope you hear loud and clear from Kathryn and I today is it's never too late to get out of that drift. It's never too late to try something new, to engage with someone new, to stop paddling so hard and experiencing burnout because you're just not recognizing that that strategy isn't what's working. It's not you that suddenly forgot how to be a great professional. It's just the world around you has changed. So your strategy needs to change. And if it's time to do that, I hope you'll take that opportunity in the new year. And I hope this episode has encouraged you to take ownership of that, because that's one thing I know for sure is that you are ridiculously in charge of the future you're choosing. So choose well. You don't get to control everything. None of us get out of here alive, but you have a lot more control over the daily decisions you make. And it's your opportunity to decide, I don't want to drift anymore. I want to do something about it, and I'm ready to learn something new and try something new. And if that's you, I hope this is going to be a much better year because you caught this episode early. And we want to thank you for joining us on Building Bigger Lives, because these are the kind of topics we want to explore with you each and every Wednesday. You'll find us here on Apple Podcasts, as well as Spotify, on Audible, and of course on video on YouTube. If you prefer to see what we're doing as we enjoy these discussions, you'll find us there as well. And we hope we'll see you again next Wednesday.